Welcome to Focus on Issues. I'm Anna Gerking, and we have a great show for you today. Our guests today are from the LGBT community here in Grand Rapids, and we're going to have a great conversation about some of the challenges and celebrations that the LGBTQ plus community has here. If we can start off with introducing yourself, how you identify your pronoun, and who you're representing today.
All right. Hi, I'm Obs Thompson, she, her pronouns. I am a social worker in the area, and I am a social worker at Safe Haven Ministries, but also representing myself.
Hi, I'm Larry Duchesne. I'm the Center Administrator for the Grand Rapids Pride Center. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm a cis gay man.
Hi, I'm Carlos Garay-Negron. I use they, them pronouns. I identify as a trans femme. I'm also pretty queer. I work as a member specialist and communications coordinator at HQ. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Simon Kiddock. I use they, them pronouns. I identify as queer and non-binary, and I am the executive director for the Grand Rapids Trans Foundation.
Well, thank you all so much for coming and taking the time out of your insanely busy lives to come here and talk with us today. So the first question I have for you all is, who is someone in the LGBTQ plus community that you see as a role model?
It's always a toughie. There's so many, right?
There are.
Yeah. I think for me, if I had to pick one, and I'm just picking out of a huge pool of people, there is a professor of women and gender sexuality studies at GVSU called Cale Keegan. He is one of the leading trans theorists in the entirety of the world, basically. Wow. Does a lot of work in American studies. When I came to Michigan, I didn't have any idea what being trans even was. I actually held some really deeply rooted transphobic, misogynistic, and like internalized homophobic and racist beliefs about myself and my community. And his class, I do understand that education's a privilege in itself, but like his class really opened my eyes. I was able to actually think about things in ways that I was like, I didn't even know this was a thing. And really put me in the path that literally puts me in this chair right now talking to you. So I always rave about Cale Keegan. And I think it's really interesting how we have this amazing, illustrious, like deeply like respected in his field trans scholar, and like hardly anyone even knows. And so just like I specifically have like a lot of respect and admiration, and certainly the sort of person who like made me into who I am now.
I think for me, Audre Lorde was a big one for me, specifically because I think growing up, there wasn't a lot of queer females that I saw who represented, and realistically they were there, but it wasn't put in the spotlight in the way that it should have been. So I think getting older and starting to recognize more strong women of color who are queer was huge, and reading about her poetry and her work was incredibly important in understanding to have a voice and to be strong as a queer person of color.
That's amazing to hear. And Larry, since you are representing the Pride Center today, and I also hope that other panelists also contribute to this question, why are resources such as the Pride Center important to have in the Grand Rapids community?
Well, they're important to have in every community. We have this this idea that, or so many people have this idea that, oh, you have marriage equality, you have this, you have that things are over. And what we're dealing with is and Carlos can speak to it even better than I can, which is, we make up maybe anywhere between 7 to 10% of the population, but we make up 40% of the homeless. So youth are still being bullied to death. Youth are still being attacked. We still live in an area where people vote on our rights as individuals, as human beings, as Americans. And so these are the daily things that are still going on every single day. So having access to supportive and safe environments is more important now than ever. We have, with the internet, there's so much also misinformation out there, and there's so many pitfalls and traps that people can fall into. Having a brick and mortar space where especially youth can go to, that they know is their space, that's a lifesaver.
It's amazing.
Yeah, I think that real social change only happens if we have community. And all too often, all marginalized people, but I'm thinking specifically here about LGBT folks, are led to feel for a long time that they're alone, and that there is no community for LGBT people, that it's just you, and having spaces where you can form community, where you can talk to people who identify in the ways that you do, who have identified the same shortcomings and problems that you have, leads you to remember that you're not alone and that you can cause change. Those spaces are really important. Seeing spaces where there are older role models, people you can look at and say, this person literally survived things that I couldn't see myself 10, 20 years into my life. Here's a person who's 10, 20 years older than me, showing that you can get there. Those spaces really matter because those are the spaces where actual where conversations about social justice and social change happen, and where those things are actually enacted. It's not in boardrooms or armchairs, or it's really like down there talking to each other, identifying the issues and doing something about it. I think the Pride Center is a great space to do that.
Definitely. And Simon, kind of leading to that, and the Trans Foundation. Can you tell me a bit why it's important to have the Trans Foundation here in Grand Rapids?
Well, I'll speak a little bit to the last question. I also feel like every community is very different, and I feel like having spaces that are specific, very, very regionally specific to an area can really help identify those places that need to be addressed, those problems that need to be addressed in that community. It might be different for other communities. So I think statewide organizations and nationwide organizations are really important, but I feel like they, kind of by their very nature, can't have the pulse on every individual community and how they're kind of different and unique. I would say the Trans Foundation, it's important to have the Trans Foundation here in Grand Rapids for the same reason why I think it's important to have trans organizations in any other part of the country, honestly. I think the LGB community has made great strides. I think they've gotten a lot more acceptance, a lot more wealth, social progression, things like that. But trans community, people of color especially within the trans community, it's still really rough, still rampant unemployment, poverty, homelessness, and we at the Trans Foundation are trying to kind of stem some of that by allowing low-income trans folks to get through education, get a well-paying job, obtain kind of some of that financial stability here in the city, whether they stay here or not. We think that one of the best ways that we can support the trans community is by direct equity, basically, by giving funds directly to the people who need it.
While I was doing research for this show, I found out that the Princeton Review has ranked Grand Rapids' own Calvin College as the 13th most unfriendly college/university for LGBTQ+. Do you believe that this is a reflection of Grand Rapids? If so, why? If not, why?
I can't speak directly to Calvin College. I haven't been there. I have met with some people from Calvin College, and I also know they have a great group called Saga. So they actually do have an LGBT group for their students. But I don't know enough about Calvin itself, so I can't speak to that. I think that, Grand Rapids is a unique beast where we have quite a conservative root. But over the last few years, I've seen immense change in Grand Rapids, in progress in it. I mean, we, with someone's help and along with the Trans Foundation and the Pride Center, were able to get out over 100 trans flags for Trans Week of Visibility. So businesses were flying those flags. And so instead of speaking to, yes, there's hardship, but the growth that I've seen and the number of businesses that are willing to step out and visually show their support on the street, not just in their employee handbook or behind closed doors, but really come out and show their support has been incredible. And I think that having that visual support, visibility is our greatest ally. So the more people who can be visible, the more people who can be out, the more people you meet, the better that is. And when you have industry behind you, that's even better. I mean, most people in 2012, I think it was, there's like 30% approval rating for same-gender marriage in the United States. Well, by the time in 2015, 16, 15, when it came through, it was up to 60 some odd percent. And the number one reason people said that they had changed their minds was because they knew somebody who was gay. And so we want to take that visibility and move forward with it. But I'm not going to mistake the fact that we are still in a very conservative area.
Yeah, and I think that conservatism, I'm so sorry to
No,
interrupt.
you got it.
I'm the worst at this.
No, you're not. Absolutely.
The gears turning. I think that conservatism speaks to, it's just a small part of the fact that cities are complex spaces. I think that Grand Rapids is a space where a lot of the big decisions are made from conservative mind points, but also it's a place where, because of this, it is a space of tension, and spaces of tension are where change happens. I think it's really interesting that, for example, at GVSU, there is an uncommonly large concentration of people who identify as transmasc or transmasculine, which is strange because in other colleges, those people are rare or non-existent. So it's interesting how like these spaces that are only just slightly away from Grand Rapids are where like LGBT people are like flocking to, at least when they're thinking about higher education. But that says to us that there is a big population actually in the Grand Rapids area that's identifying problems, that's getting together. I'm thinking about Saga as well and Calvin, who are really seeing those spaces of tension and addressing and identifying. But I think that, again, that's just one small piece, because at the same time we have issues like gentrification, urban displacement, homelessness, which all work together to create a complex city, like all cities are, but like how Grand Rapids is.
Carlos?
Absolutely. I think all of those are incredible points. And however, you have this, Calvin especially, I graduated back in 2013, 14-ish, and it was very clear that you have this conservative power that is there, specifically white men who are in power who essentially kind of run that to a point. And I think like groups like Saga are huge, where people are trying to become more visible. Because I know I didn't come out until after I graduated from Calvin, because all those messages were the same over and over and over again. And I grew up around Calvin because I have my dad's a professor there who is supportive, but it's a tough thing to grow up around when the college that is supposed to support you and teach you and encourage you essentially kind of shuts you down in so many ways. And I would say that the social work program was a bit of a different little place for that, where you could explore a lot of that and have that support, but the greater message was that it wasn't going to be accepted. And I love what you said about tension, because I think that is huge where change does get created, and they're definitely seeing that. And I think that's been around for some time too. When I was around, there was conversations that were happening, but it was still like, shh, we don't need to talk about this, not really, you know? So yeah, and I think, yeah, Simon might have some more about that too.
I don't really have too much more, but I also graduated from Calvin back in 2008, and I think that I want to first of all point out that at Calvin, there are plenty of loving and supportive people. The people who run Saga, a lot of instructors are really, really great. But ultimately what it comes down to at Calvin is the policies at Calvin are largely dictated by a pretty conservative denomination, Christian Reformed, and dictated by a hyper-conservative donor base. And I think the ways that progress are made at Calvin are going to be different than the ways that progress are going to be made in the larger city. So I think there is an interaction between the two, but I don't think that it's necessarily a reflection. I think Calvin is dealing with a lot more internal politics about how it gets its funding and how it deals with the denomination that it's kind of functioning under.
So Grand Rapids being a dominant Christian Reformed community to a certain extent, at least in its heritage, its founding and things like that, do you see that reflected in challenges that LGBTQ plus community here faces, or?
Absolutely. I think there is the fact that a lot of organizations within Grand Rapids are Christian based. So now I think some are really trying to create some change so where LGBTQ can feel more comfortable coming to, but there's still that automatic response when you have something like ministries at the end of the name or something along those lines. So it's doing some real work to change that image and make it a safe place for individuals to come, because that is a lot of that base.
And I know that Carlos and Ops, both of you work for organizations that have a faith-based funding. HQ, Mars Hill, Safe Haven Ministries, a lot of CRC churches. Did you ever feel hesitant to share how you identify through the application process, or were you just like, this is who I am? Was it ever in the back of your mind?
So last summer, HQ, I want to be really respectful here and really kind of in a way admirant to the way that Mars Hill and HQ's partnership started. Mars Hill committed when HQ was started to funding HQ for 5 years. And last summer, we actually went ahead and just were like, we've got it from here. And they were like, dude, that's great. The fact that HQ is very strongly non-faith-based because of the issues that you were literally just discussing, we knew that the only way to be as liberal as possible was to be non-faith-based and faith-welcoming to all people. And we know that the LGBT community has had market, and other communities as well, market historical reasons why they wouldn't engage with faith-based communities, and we wanted to be respectful to that. And Mars Hill knew that from the beginning, and they still funded us. So we actually haven't been directly funded. Obviously, we have donors who happen to be part of the Mars Hill congregation, or donors from really any congregation. But HQ is fully independent now, and we've always staunchly reassured people that we are not faith-based. We want to make sure that anybody can come to HQ, regardless of what their background is, because as you mentioned, that's just a really important part of addressing the way in which we service those communities. So I personally, coming into HQ, that was one of the big reasons that I even applied to work there, was that I was like, I can be out, I can be visible. I'm encouraged to be out and visible, not just to staff, but to members, to community partners. I really needed that from a workplace, and I appreciate that I have it. So my only worry was having literally dyed hair. I was like, can I dye my hair? And they're like, sure.
So do you feel like that is common in organizations and companies here in Grand Rapids, or?
I do. I know, at least when with Safe Haven, I was upfront right from the beginning. I identify as a queer female, and if that's going to be an issue within this organization, then I'm not meant to be a part of this. And I was met with a lot of affirmation, I would say. I would say my coworkers especially, they create a big part of that, right? How an environment's going to be is it's top down, but especially the individuals who are working day to day. And that's what's going to make that difference, that when someone walks in the door, that they are going to be able to feel comfortable, but also having those identifying things, like just simply having a flag present to show that it's a safe place to go. And I think a lot of these organizations do have work to do. We have work to do, absolutely.
Yeah. Grand Rapids also has some amazing faith-based organizations that are completely on board and inclusive. I think we had 15 or 16 churches represented at Grand Rapids Pride Festival last year. We have several out pastors in this city, people who are on the ground making change and doing those things. But we also have more organizations coming to us, places that I never thought would in a million years would change. Mel Trotter Ministries has opened a trans-only safe space there, and talking about funding, they were concerned because they come from a very conservative base, but they found actually by going to their funders and talking, and they did the right thing. They took their time to do this. A lot of places want to have a 5-minute conversation with us and then slap a safe space sticker on their door and go, look what we've done. And they really took the time to look at their policies, to look at their training, look at other things. And
Amazing.
I'm not going to say that they're perfect, but I will say that they are working really hard. But what they found when going to their funders, a lot of their funders were, even though they were seen as very conservative or ultra-Christian or however you want to talk about it, said, well, I just assumed you were doing this already. it's just the right thing to do. What is the goal of our organization? Our organization is to get people safe, get people sober, get people a job, get people to move forward in their life. And how can we best do that? You best do that by serving the whole person. And so, there's a lot of great organizations that are leading way, and having then places like Mel Trotter be open, out, and visible about their support
Huge.
helps make change in other organizations as
That's
well.
amazing to hear. And speaking of that, what to you makes a good ally? That's like, actually, I could use that advice. So go ahead and talk to me. What can I do to be a good ally?
I think I have some really, really basic things. I think being a good ally is taking time to educate yourself and not necessarily relying on the community that you're hoping to learn from predominantly. I think a lot of people in marginalized communities get kind of overwhelmed with having to answer 101 questions about their community. So educating yourself, putting in that work yourself.
And how can I become educated? Where do I go?
The internet.
Okay.
The internet is a magical place.
Google is great.
Yeah.
Google.
Google's
Okay.
great. But you can
Oh, sorry.
No.
And then just the one other thing I was going to say is that I think it's important, and I would love to hear you all talk a little bit more about it, because I don't know if I can say it quite as well as you. But basically just understanding the points of privilege that you stand in, and knowing when to utilize that privilege for the betterment of the marginalized community, using the privilege to create spaces where marginalized voices can be heard, basically.
That was a great. I'm excited to Google something.
That was really good.
Also, I want to really quick, Obs and Carlos, something that has been really on the docket is about the role of intersectionality and homophobia in Latino communities and Black communities. Can you guys kind of shed a light on that? And is it overstated that there's homophobia in these communities? Is it overstated that intersectionality is a challenge?
I have a lot of thoughts about the homophobia piece, so maybe you can talk about intersectionality, even though I just don't want to take up all the space. But I have been thinking a lot about this, and specifically those questions that you are posing. I think it is fair to say that a lot of communities of color, because of historical reasons and social cultural reasons, do face misogyny, homophobia, and other systems of oppression differently than how it happens in white communities. But I do sometimes think about, like a question that I always ask myself is, when we talk about homophobia in the Black community, in the Latino community, in any sort of POC community, are we doing that to divert conversations around homophobia in white communities? Are we trying to take a quality that we see as negative and maybe distancing ourselves from that? Which is why, like, I hear a lot of people being like, homophobia is so prevalent in the Latino community, and the Latinx community, and the Black community, and I'm like, well, it's really prevalent in the white community too, especially like in West Michigan. So oftentimes I think about the ways in which that is actually just for some people, it's a codified way of saying white communities are more open, white communities are more accepting, and I can tell you for a fact that that is not true. Like, one of the biggest issues that LGBT communities face is racism, rampant racism, and misogyny. So, like, telling like, it just feels like this is a way to ignore, and it plays into intersectionality. So I think maybe the better way of thinking about it is, how is it different? Not necessarily how is it more prevalent, less prevalent, more likely, less likely. Those are irrelevant things. I think perhaps the better question is, how is it different, and how are Latinx people, POC people, having conversations around that difference and around how to address that differently, and how can allies, or how can people in general help? How can we amplify those voices and empower people so that we can learn about the ways in which those systems intersect and create new and different challenges, as opposed to asking the question, like, is it more or less prevalent? Because I think that question is deeply rooted in racist systems.
Thanks, Carlos.
Man, I kind of want to hear what you have to say.
That was really good.
Yeah. and you pick up after me for sure. Like, I think with intersectionality especially, you see that the more somebody is intersectional, the more barriers they're going to come across. So with intersectionality in general, I mean, we see that the more intersectional somebody is, the more they are going to run into barriers. It's gonna be so much more difficult to access services, and that's rooted in a lot of racism, like you were talking about. As well as just the fact, I mean, you look at within different communities, the most at-risk individual are going to be trans women of color. Have all those different intersectionalities coming together, and it's going to create a lot of issues and make it very difficult to move up, and that system stays in place because of it.
Wow, thank you. That was great.
Yeah.
Actually, we're going to end right now with the last question. With everything we've talked about, the good, the bad, the ugly, what makes you stay in Grand Rapids?
I see a big difference. I grew up in Grand Rapids. I'm a bit older than the rest of the panelists. And so, and I left in the early '90s because being a little queer boy in Grand Rapids, it felt very unsafe completely, and I wasn't accepted, and I was physically attacked several times, and I thought to myself, let me go somewhere where I have a bigger community. So I went to the East Coast for 20 years. And so I was in New York, and then I was in Boston, and then Philadelphia, and I was able to kind of find myself and find my own voice and find a community. And when I came back, I wanted to kind of bring that power back with me to Grand Rapids. And so the growth that I've seen in the last few years has been phenomenal. But you were talking earlier, like those of us with privilege, we need to utilize that privilege for the betterment of our entire community. I can't just be an LGBTQ advocate. I have to be a Black Lives Matter advocate. I have to be an advocate for women. I have to be an advocate for people with low socioeconomic status. I have to be those advocates also, because they all play into moving my community and other communities forward. And I see those things happening here, and it's exciting to me. It's exciting. These people right here, around here, these younger people who are not afraid to use their voice are exceptional, and it's very exciting to me.
Beautiful. Thank you. I'm tearing up a little bit.
I didn't grow up here. I grew up in Puerto Rico. I moved here when I was 20, like 6 years ago. It feels like so long ago. And I lived in Allendale most of the time. I didn't have that perspective of what it was like living downtown, what it was like living in Grand Rapids, or even having that experience of growing up here. But my partner did. My partner was born in Hudsonville. He's an out trans person. He's non-binary. He's queer. And those things are hard in Hudsonville. They're hard in West Michigan, but they're hard in Hudsonville. And what he says, what I think I took to heart, and what my answer to this is that for a lot of queer and trans people who live in Grand Rapids, the answer is leave. Like you go to Philly, you go to California, you go literally anywhere that is in Grand Rapids. But what happens to the people who can't? What happens to people who are homeless in Grand Rapids, who are LGBTQ, people who are living with their parents, who really need those to have visible queer and trans people who they can literally look at, even just walking on their street, like taking their dog out to pee-pee or like whatever, to say there's a person who's like me and I can be like that person. If we all leave, there's no one. If we all leave, social change doesn't happen. Mm-hmm. So I have no attachment to Grand Rapids. I didn't grow up here. I could literally go anywhere else, but I think that Grand Rapids sorely needs that presence. It sorely needs that change, and the only way that can happen if there's people here to do that. Mm-hmm. So that's why I stay, is because I want to be able to leave and come back 20 years from now and see an entirely different Grand Rapids where I can belong.
Well, thank you so much for staying, Carlos. Simon?
That was, and largely, I was the two things I was going to mention. One was the just vital nature of having role models for the next generation to kind of look up to. Despite its flaws, I think Grand Rapids. Despite its flaws, I really like Grand Rapids, for me, it's largely about feeling that with a little bit more applied pressure, this city can change in a lot of really positive ways. And I think a lot of the organizations that we represent, a lot of other organizations in the city, are really putting that pressure on, and we're seeing some positive movement, and that feels really good and encouraging. And I think, I don't know, yeah, it's the synergy. So seeing that change really helps us at the Trans Foundation, at least, to kind of double down on this place and really trying to push for kind of substantial change. So
Thank you, Simon.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think you all said it incredibly well. I grew up around here. My family's all from here. I literally grew up like 5 blocks from the Pride Center. And I remember when I was first in my coming out stages, all scared and stuff, walking by the Pride Center multiple times and just thinking, if I could just walk in those doors, what would that mean? What does that look like? And then being lucky enough to intern there last year, it created this idea that, wow, Grand Rapids does have this here. And after that, I was able to start seeing this everywhere and seeing how we are growing and changing regularly because of these people sitting here, because there are many out there who do want to see this change. And I think that is what keeps me here, because I want to see how we can make this happen, because it is possible.
Wow, thank you all so much. First off, for your courage of staying in Grand Rapids, and for being such amazing advocates and supporters and heroes and heroines and everything here. So I really appreciate you guys coming in, and I can't wait to see you guys in the community.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.